Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar tonight. I want to thank you for joining us. For those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet, I know I met many of you over at the AMMG conference over the weekend, or maybe we've met in the past, but if we haven't met, my name is Stephen Moore. I've been working on this project now for quite some time, since it was in its infancy, and one of the founders of MD Solutions. So we're really excited here to share with you some things that are really reshaping medicine and really empowering physicians as well as patients to do more with prevention, wellness, and a scientific way of recommending supplements in a practice that is extremely profitable. So we're going to move through some slides here really quickly. There'll be a chat section here if you guys have any questions that come through as far as that you want to ask. Feel free to chat in there, and we'll do our best to get to those questions towards the end of the webinar. Some physicians have been able to not only improve the health of their patients, but we have some physicians that have added over $1 million of cash profit to their practice. So this is something that can be quite profitable and is something that your patients are already spending money on. So let's jump through here and go through the first slide here. So I really had the privilege and honor of presenting this and teaching physicians across the US and South America. We've expanded some operations into Europe, and it's exciting to see this shift that's taking place in healthcare towards prevention. It's been one of those passions of mine for a very long time, and I want to commend you as providers that are really at the forefront and really taking charge of what you feel and understand is best for your patients. And we know that diet and lifestyle is the #1 cause of preventable disease. And this is the best solution that I've seen and many other physicians have seen to really address it. So I always like to start off maybe with asking a few questions of everybody, and just, you could say it out loud if you want to, I won't hear you, but, are you satisfied with preventive healthcare here in the United States? Are you satisfied with reimbursements and what's happening there? And are you satisfied with or your colleagues satisfied with the lifestyle of medicine? I think that as I talk to more and more physicians, what we studied for and what we kind of bought into has really been changing. It's almost like the rug is getting pulled out from many of us, and we're looking for other ways of not only providing better care to patients, but other ways of having a better life for ourselves and for our families. And so these are the 6 bullet points that I'm going to talk about tonight. #1, a little bit about some data on this shift towards prevention and wellness. I think you'll find this information interesting because I know many of you are involved in this shift and innovating in these areas, and don't feel alone. I know many of your colleagues still haven't caught on to this trend here, but we're seeing more and more physicians accelerate into prevention and wellness. #2, we'll talk about our diets and how we no longer can get everything we need from our diets. I think it's well known that and well established. #3, there's a huge demand for nutritional supplements, and I believe physicians are perfectly positioned to offer better quality recommendations to their patients. #4, we'll talk about a better way of doing that. So we know patients are already doing it. Let me show you a better way of doing it. I know when I came out of school and I was looking for ways to talk about nutrition, supplementation, it is so confusing. There's so many different brands and companies out there. And when I came across this technology, this was really a game changer for me. I really saw the impact that this was making in people's lives and the potential of this. #5, I'll talk a little bit about the company behind it and how you generate some revenue for your practice. So I think we all know that medicine is failing with chronic disease. We've got alarming rates of cancer, heart disease. We know 3 out of 4 people are dying from cancer and heart disease. Diabetes is out of control. Obesity is out of control. I mean, even look at low bone mass here in the U.S. 52 million people are affected by low bone mass. 10 million by osteoporosis. So these are major problems. And if you look at what these problems have in common, is they're related to our diet and lifestyle. These are metabolic issues. And so when you've got big problems like this, at some point, a solution will come in and it will completely make a huge impact. And that's what we're going to talk about here tonight, on how with this technology and product line, you can make a huge impact in the care of your patients. So we're also seeing that life expectancy is declining for the first time over the last several years. And so we need to start looking at, not only ways to address preventable diseases, but, life expectancy goes down. And many of you I know are in anti-aging medicine. So you're obviously concerned, and so are your patients concerned about how can we live not only longer, but extend our health span as well. And so the big blind spot in medicine is really our diets and our lifestyle. And what we've been able to show after about 30 million scans that have been done with the biophotonic scanner is we've learned that 94% of the people fail the test. Now, it's a high failure rate. It's kind of surprising, but if you look at what people are eating, it makes sense, that most people are going to fail. And so despite what we do to talk to people about diet and lifestyle, despite what supplements people are taking, we're still seeing this high failure rate because people aren't radically changing their diet or their lifestyle enough. And we're finding often that most of the supplements that people are taking are doing a poor job at reducing oxidative stress and boosting antioxidants in the body. I'm going to skip through this here and talk about point number 2, which is our diet. So number 1 here, no one's getting optimal nutrition from their diet according to the USDA. I know many of you know this, but we know that not only are we eating 1 or 2 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, usually one is ketchup, one is French fries, not quality nutrients and from diet, but that's what the average American is doing. And even the people that are eating good diets and good nutrition, what we're seeing is that the nutrients in the food are severely depleted because of the way things are farmed, also how things are being stuck in warehouses for weeks. Sometimes a lot of these vegetables and fruits are grown in different countries, thousands of miles away. So this isn't new news here about the role of multivitamins. It just takes medicine time to embrace new concepts, typically about 15 years. And there was an article published in JAMA in 2002 that all adults should take a multivitamin. And so you have a lot of your patients that are turning to vitamins, whether or not you recommend them. So according to the CDC, 50 to 70% of Americans are buying a supplement, okay? And there's no real easy way to measure their effectiveness. People are confused. They don't know what to do. They're looking for a better way of doing it. And we know that just sending them out there to these vitamin stores and so forth, or having them try to do it on their own, is not prudent anymore, because we know that the quality of the supplements that are out there are very questionable at best. And the New York Attorney General filed a cease and desist letter to Target, Walgreens, GNC, and I forget the other one right now, but Vitamin Shoppe also had a lead contamination issue several years ago. They had 10 times the upper limits of lead. They recalled their women's multivitamin, and then just a few years later, they had another lead contamination issue. So many of these companies do not have these quality control processes in place, and that's why you're continuing to see these problems, because you're dealing with products that are designed to sell for good profit margin. And the fact that there's never been a really good way to not only regulate, but also to be able to test the effectiveness of supplements. Many companies just outsource things and they private label things, and you really don't know what's going on behind the curtain. But with all that being said, people are spending more money on supplements every single year. This is a graph of supplement sales here in the US since 2000 to 2017. And you can see that it's been growing by $1 to $2 billion a year. It's approaching $40 billion in sales of supplements just here domestically. So if I'm a business person, which many of you are, you look at this chart, you look at this demand, this is a good business to get involved in. If you can have a better way that's simple, that's effective than what people are already doing, then you can redirect this spending and take better care of your patients. And so this is what's happening. People are walking up and down the vitamin aisle. I mean, if you guys have ever walked up and down a nutritional aisle at a pharmacy or a health food store, I mean, it's completely confusing. Even if you go in there knowing or think you know about different supplements and nutrition, it's still confusing for you because there's no way to compare these brands. And so people are really left with the question is, what supplement do you take? How do you know if it's working? Right? And that's the question. Or if you're a physician, how do you know which one to recommend, and how do you know if it's working? To do blood testing on every patient isn't practical. It's too expensive. It's invasive. And testing nutrients in the blood isn't even that effective, because we're really a lot of times just looking at what people have been eating the last few days, not really what their patterns of behavior are over time. And then who wants to go and repeat that test in a few months to measure things, or repeat it on a regular basis? And so we're going to show you technology here that many of you have seen already that actually solves this problem, because I got a kick out of this when I saw this on the internet. This is what your patients are doing. I think this was at GNC, at least it looks like that. This lady is saying, this is what you want. Trust me, I'm the manager, right? And we laugh about that, but that's what most people are doing. And what I believe is that healthcare providers are much better positioned to make recommendations, because with your education, you can better evaluate quality products. And if you look at the potential lost revenue per physician right now, there's currently on average about $700,000 of business that's being sent out the door for physicians. And that's, and that's when we get a 5% market share with this. So there's a lot of disruption that can take place that you can benefit from and take care of your patients. So point number 4, let's talk about a better way of doing this. So this device, when I first looked at this, I looked at the first prototype back in 2003. Yes, it's been, this technology has been out for a while. It just hasn't been very user-friendly. It took time to validate things. No different than the cell phone, right? When the cell phone, was a brick, not many people had them. They were expensive, and they weren't very user-friendly. But when you look at where cell phones are now, like when I was a kid, my uncle was the only person I knew that had a brick cell phone. And now we all have them, right? We've cut, a lot of us don't even have landlines anymore. And that's what happens with technology as it disrupts markets through innovation. And that's what's happened with this device. So the history of this is, this was not invented by Pharmanex, who makes the supplements. It wasn't some gadget that they developed to sell more of their products. This was actually developed through Nobel Prize winning science from 1930, right, called Raman spectroscopy. And it was funded by the National Institute of Health in the mid-90s to really develop a way to screen for risk factors of macular degeneration, and then it was expanded to other diseases. This in 1999 is the original scanner. This was a picture taken at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And when you look at that, it looks kind of like a weapon of mass destruction, I guess. It was a 6-foot-long laser. It was a huge, huge device there. And not something you're going to put in your practice. There was one of these in the world. And so this was then expanded to measure risk factors of other diseases. It was being used for cancer research, and some of the patents talk about heart disease and some other things there. And all this happened before Pharmanex was even involved. And this was invented at the University of Utah Center for Biomedical Optics. Kind of I think a neat history of this is Raman spectroscopy, or this technology was also used or developed in conjunction with the astronomy department. And you might ask why, and it's because Raman spectroscopy is used in telescopes to tell us what distant stars and galaxies are made of. If you think about it, you can't take a biopsy or a sample of a star. So you've got to have a non-invasive way of understanding what that star is made of, or planet is made of, or whatever. So they figured that they might be able to apply that technology to biological tissue, and that was the genesis of it. And Pharmanex's headquarters happens to be near the University of Utah. There was a connection that was made, and they said, wow, if we could take this device and commercialize it, maybe what we could do is actually prove to people that the science of the products are working better than most supplements out there, and we can measure it in people's bodies. Much like we measure cholesterol, we measure blood pressure, we're measuring hormones and finding major hormone deficiencies. Look at what's happening with vitamin D. We're finding almost everybody is deficient in vitamin D. And when you can measure things, you can really, one, justify the need for a treatment or therapy, and then you can actually evaluate how well that therapy is working. So that was the reason why Pharmanex acquired the technology, and they invested about $120 million to commercialize this device to get it to where it is today, And this current version's been out a little bit over 5 years, which is the third generation of the commercial unit. They were awarded most innovative company in the United States, along with Apple Computer, for mid-cap companies. They took first place for innovation. It's a very substantial award by the American Business Awards. And a little bit about this test, if you haven't seen it, it's a quick 30-second test. It's non-invasive. The newest version of the device is totally portable. It runs off a battery and an iPad app. It's super easy to use. And we're finding that when people switch to the Pharmanex supplements, we're seeing close to 100% response rate within 2 months. In fact, Pharmanex will guarantee an improvement in the scores on the supplements, or people will get their money back. So if you look at what measuring does, we look at these markers of cardiovascular health or markers of diabetes and things like that. And it allows us to evaluate quickly how that patient is doing, to intervene and to monitor the effectiveness of the protocols that we're recommending. And so, when we look at medicine, we evaluate things, we recommend things, and then we reevaluate. Vitamin D, I mentioned. And so when it's come to supplements, a lot of us have just kind of recommended things, hoping they're working without really having a before and after measurement. And the biophotonic scanner really fills that void as a simple screening tool that you can do on every patient. So many of the physicians that are utilizing this, this is a vital sign. Like I said, we know that diet and lifestyle is the #1 cause of preventable disease. And so it makes sense and it's prudent to just do this on everybody because it's such an easy test to do. So let's continue to go through here. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to send a chat message and we'll get to those questions here if we can. So I'm not going to talk about free radicals and antioxidants very much. Most of you probably understand this by now, but free radicals are the bad guys. They're oxidizing the body. And antioxidants are the good guys that are protecting our cells from the free radicals. If you do a cross section of your cell, you have your phospholipid bilayer here. For many of you guys that are doing hormone therapy, these are your hormone receptors. So think about that. Hormone receptors are made primarily of cholesterol. They're anchored in a phospholipid bilayer that's essentially made of fat. And so these two structures of the cell are very vulnerable to oxidation, right? We know fat is vulnerable to oxidation. So what the body does is the body takes the vitamin E and takes carotenoids, which are fat-soluble antioxidants. So all these squiggly lines are different types of carotenoids, and they get laced all within the cell membrane to protect these structures from free radical damage. If you don't have enough of these antioxidants or low levels, your cells are getting oxidized. Your hormone receptors aren't working very well as well. And if you're doing HRT on patients and you're finding you're having to up and up their dose because they're not holding on to their hormones, well, I'll bet if you tested them, they would have low levels of antioxidants. So this is an adjunct therapy to HRT, as well as any type of age management. We need to know what this protective barrier is of these cells that's protecting every single cell in your body, which is why these carotenoid antioxidants are related to all-cause morbidity, mortality, and I'll go through some studies here in a little bit. The technology is pretty simple. A 473 nanometer light goes in. It's a blue light. It hits these carotenoid double bonds or carbon double bonds. It scatters back a different frequency at 510 nanometers. This is highly specific to the molecules. It's not measuring color. It's actually reacting to the molecules in the skin. And the amount or density of these antioxidants in the skin sends back these photons, and the device then counts those photons or the intensity of the light coming back, and it can tell you very accurately the amount of these carotenoids or density in the tissue, which is in the skin, which is the largest organ in the body, which is why it's such a great way of measuring things. Much more accurate and reliable than blood testing, because you're actually taking it where the site of action is, where these nutrients are being absorbed, and you're not seeing day-to-day or even really week-to-week variability. This test is more like a hemoglobin A1C, where it's looking at a window over time, over several months. which is what we're really concerned about when we're looking at a patient's diet and lifestyle. I don't care if a patient ate great yesterday and ate bad the rest of the month. And I don't care if they went out partying with their friends over the weekend, but they were eating healthy all the other times. What I care about is what is their pattern of behavior over time, and that's what this device can do. So your patients will come in, they'll get a baseline score here. Let's say their baseline score is 25,000. We would grade that as a D. Obviously, we've got room for improvement. We know that patients that have healthy lifestyles and behavior should be over 50,000. So that's really a target and where we're looking to get. So they'd start on the nutritional supplements, Life Pack or Age Lock Youth. In 2 months, you'd have them come back to get retested. Again, if their score doesn't go up, they get their money back. So it's really easy to have a quick conversation with your patients to get them to try something new once you've showed them that 94% of the time what they're doing is not working. You don't have to sit there and argue with them about what the quality is of supplements and why they should take one over another. You can give them a measurement and say, this is where you are. It's like stepping in on a scale. Let's work on improving this. Let's make some changes here. And then after about 4 to 6 months, your patients will tend to plateau. And then you want to monitor them over time, because if you see a drastic drop in their score for no known reason, then it's an indicator that something is causing a lot of oxidative stress in the body. That could be cancer. It could be some other chronic illness that's been undiagnosed. So this device is not diagnostic of disease, but what we know is it's very sensitive to oxidative stress. We've had physicians that have seen patients, actually a doctor who's a friend of mine here locally, is an OBGYN. He saw a couple women in their 20s. They were scoring pretty well, and all of a sudden their scores dropped and nothing had changed. And he had ruled out everything else, trying to figure out what was causing a drop in their score. And he sent them out for mammograms. And they actually ended up catching breast cancer in these 2 women in their 20s. And the oncologist was just shocked at, why did you send these patients out for a mammogram? How did you know? And he started to explain that, well, their scores dropped and I was trying to figure out why, and nothing was coming up. So, the next thing to look for was breast cancer, and save those women's lives. And it's been pretty miraculous to see what we've been able to do, not with finding out where patients are and work on improving them, but also the importance of monitoring them over time. So here's the scores. This is a very simple thing to recommend to the patients and explain. It's very simple for patients to understand. Sometimes the simplest things are the most effective things to change behavior. So this is like a gas gauge. Low is bad, high is good. The more antioxidant protection you have, typically the better it is going to be. So we know that the average smoker is down here around 14,000. We know the average American is in the 20s, which isn't very good. Your obese patients are down here in the red. Your chronically ill patients are down there. Patients that had bariatric surgery, often you can't even get a reading from them. And unfortunately, if anyone here is treating children, children also tend to be down in this bottom zone because of what they're eating. So there's a lot of impact that we can make with this technology to change behavior and work on improving scores through proper supplementation. So let's look at the Pharmanex Life Pack product. Average person on that product is 48,000, so doubled the average score. And when they couple it with the Age Lock Youth product, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, you're seeing people get all the way up here. So we're seeing huge improvements in scores. My score personally was 31,000 when I started, and now my high has been 90,000, but I usually average in the 80s or so. My score is in the 60s right now because I was in Peru and I got some GI issue for 2 weeks, and I also had a little bit of a surgical procedure, and that caused some oxidation and inflammation in my body and caused my score to drop. So I'm working right now on improving it. It's very interesting to see how trauma and illness can impact your score. I had a concussion about 14 years ago and 13 years ago. My score went from 75,000 to 38,000 4 weeks after that concussion, and then it was able to go back up. So it's pretty neat measurement of oxidation in the body. So let's talk a little bit about some validation here. Yale University did a 10-year study on the technology. This was funded by the NIH to study cancer originally. This was also done in conjunction with the USDA and the Center of Science and Public Interest. And what they concluded was that this measurement is essentially a biomarker of diet and lifestyle risk factors for disease, and that they talked about developing this technology further. I think they were using the first generation unit here to make it more accessible for people for public health purposes. And so obviously we've got the newest version of this available, and it's really making a huge impact. This came out, what was this, about 4 years ago or so. So a 10-year study from Yale University. There's now over 90 studies in peer-reviewed journals that are validating this technology. So this has been presented at leading scientific symposiums all over the world. We also have seen, the significance of carotenoids, which is a question that a lot of physicians have is, okay, you're just measuring the carotenoids. What does that mean? Well, not only is it a marker of these diet and lifestyle risk factors, but carotenoids are also independent risk factors for many diseases. This is a study done from Harvard University, published in the Journal of National Cancer Institute, showing that high levels of these carotenoids, which is what we're measuring, will significantly lower risk of breast cancer. So if I were a woman and I had breasts, I would want to get this score done. I would want to improve my score. I would want to be proactive with keeping myself healthy. And we know carotenoids play a role in many other forms of cancer too. So this was also a study that was published out of Italy that showed, this was actually done with the device, showing that women that had higher scores had significantly better 5-year survival rates from breast cancer. So not only are carotenoids have been proven to have an impact in preventing breast cancer, but also in survival rates. So let's look at the literature here. This is about a year and a half old. I pulled a colleague of mine actually pulled a PubMed search of some of these diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, stroke, and so forth. And they looked at, okay, how many studies are published on oxidative stress on PubMed, and look at the number of studies published on oxidative stress and these related to these diseases. Look at the number of studies published on antioxidants in these diseases, and look at the number of studies published specifically on carotenoids. 258 studies about the role of carotenoids in Alzheimer's, 128 on Parkinson's, 17,000 cancer, 421 for pain, surgical recovery, 50 studies at the time, joints, 63, rheumatoid arthritis. So if many of your patients are suffering from these things, so yes, measuring carotenoids is a very significant marker that every patient should know and work on improving. Kids are fun to test. These are actually my 3 kids. It is so fun to keep kids motivated. Like I told you, most of the kids are in the red zone. My kids will often get in the blue zone, sometimes in the platinum zone. And if they dip into the green zone or below, I gamify this thing for them. I make it fun, and they know how to improve it. They know that they need to eat some more fruits and vegetables, and I get some leverage on my kids to teach them healthy behaviors when they're young. We high five each other. We make it fun. And if they get into the top zone, we go to the toy store and we get a little something for them. So if he was 4 here, a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old can understand this, patients can definitely understand this as well. We see huge changes in behavior. So some other studies here about the technology, some more validation. Stanford University published a study on how the device actually can measure carotenoids in the skin. And they did some studies looking at UV damage and how these scanner scores were decreasing after exposure to UV. So it was actually showing how these carotenoids will protect the skin from UV damage, so aging and things like that, possibly cancer too. So that was a study published from Stanford with the technology. Texas Tech Medical School has a few devices in their clinic, and New York College of Optometry is using it for eye health. It's been published in the leading ophthalmology conference. There's a major publication there. We talked about this being Nobel Prize science. Dr. Oz, for what it's worth, even did a whole episode on it and preventing cancer. This was not paid for by the company. We were actually invited onto that show where they did a show about cancer. And then a lot of the genetic research that I'm going to go over here later on in the webinar was featured on the Discovery Channel, which came out to the Pharmanex headquarters and filmed an entire documentary on the age lock or genetic science. Pharmanex was also the first nutritional company to get the approval to sponsor the U.S. Olympic team. They're NSF certified. They're listed in the PDR. They're a Forbes top 100 most trustworthy company, and they're top rated by Dun & Bradstreet and the Better Business Bureau. So this is a company that does the right thing and will take good care of your patients. So let's talk a little bit about the foundation of the company and how Pharmanex got started. This is not your typical supplement company. The founders here came from actually pharma. Michael Chang was the former director of medicinal chemistry at Merck. He was there actually doing a lot of research on drug discovery. Joseph Chang was over at Wyeth doing drug discovery. He invented Lodyne, Rapamune, and a photocancer therapy. Michael Chang actually developed the first statin drug, which he actually developed it or discovered it from red yeast rice. So the natural red yeast rice was his discovery, and then that led to the development of a statin. And then Carl Gerasi invented the birth control pill from the Mexican yam. So these three scientists were experts at natural medicine, researching about 50,000 plant samples during their careers. And what they had learned was that the data on the natural products was much better than the drugs that were being made. I mean, if you look at red yeast rice versus the statin drugs, obviously red yeast rice is safer, more effective when it's produced properly. And these scientists just got very frustrated that they had all this data that the natural compounds they discovered were working better than the drugs that were coming out. And the drug companies don't want to produce anything natural because they can't patent it. So these scientists decided to leave the drug world, and they were going to bring their research to really apply a pharmaceutical standard to natural product development. And they wanted to bring their discoveries to the supplement world. And when they started to evaluate a lot of the supplement companies, to them, it was all really a bunch of snake oil. I mean, no one was really doing the levels of standards and quality control and sourcing that they were used to seeing in pharma. And so they decided to start their own company, and they raised $46 million in venture capitalist funding to start the company. It was the largest nutritional startup ever. And they originally grew their brand to about 40,000 pharmacies. And then they decided to get out of retail because retail was more about marketing and price than it was about quality. It was very difficult to get a quality message out there in retail when patients or people are just kind of looking at a price in a bottle. So even though they were doing well in retail for a few years, they were looking for a better way of educating their consumers. A division of Monsanto tried to buy them in 1998 for about $130 million. And no, they didn't sell to Monsanto, thank goodness. And Wyeth actually tried to buy them, which is now owned by Pfizer, for about the same amount. And they didn't want to go back into the drug world, and maybe the drug companies would have just squashed them, who knows. But there was a direct sales company called New Skin Enterprises, which is a skincare company that was doing really well in the 90s, and they had a lot of money to invest in the future of the company. And they ended up buying Pharmanex and pouring even more money into the company. This is their headquarters now today. They employ 100 full-time scientists, not a scientific advisory board or a medical advisory board. 100 full-time scientists work for this company. About a third of them are PhDs, and they have affiliates with different universities where they collaborate with about 150 other scientists from major universities all over the world to really take a global consensus of what the literature shows. And all these PhDs that they have in-house really gives them a much better perspective, because no one or two scientists have all the answers. So this headquarters here in the top right is in Provo, Utah. This building here on the left was that I'm circling here. This was a $150 million investment that they made as an expansion. 2 floors of this is a state-of-the-art lab. And they have another $50 million facility that's about the same size in Asia to really unlock a lot of the secrets in Chinese medicine using a westernized pharmaceutical type of approach. This is our training center, which we'll invite you to if you want to come out to our training facility and take really a deep dive into the science and the quality of the company. That's something that I did early on, and it was really educational for me. So this company, from what I've seen, really sets themselves apart from any other brand that was out there. And that's why I had so much confidence getting rid of the other brands I was using and using primarily, Pharmanex at first exclusively. And there's a few other products that I like to use that they don't make. And I always kind of question the quality, but Pharmanex has the majority of the stuff that I use and recommend. So we talked a little bit about the role of antioxidants and the role of nutrition. And now we're going into the area of gene expression. So this is a very exciting area of research that's been being done. I'm going to explain to it briefly here. If you'd like more information about this, we can certainly send you out some videos and some literature on it. But age-lock technology is the ability to target or identify genes or gene expression related to aging to formulate products that can then target those genes and reset or restore the epigenetic function back to how it was when you were younger and healthier, literally addressing the genetic sources or epigenetic sources of aging. So these gene chips here have the ability to measure all 25,000 genes in one experiment as far as gene expression or gene function. And what we know now is that when you're young, your genes express themselves like this on the left. This happens to be a gene profile just for the mitochondria. So this is a young, healthy mitochondria when you have lots of energy, good endurance, and things like that. But when you get older, these genes will upregulate and these genes at the bottom will downregulate. And so these genes now look like they're functioning old. And that's why we have less energy and a 40% decline in ATP production. It all happens with gene expression. The genes are basically getting out of tune, much like an instrument will get out of tune. You know, the instrument's the same, but when it's out of tune, it doesn't sound as well. And that's what happens with the DNA. The DNA doesn't change, but the way it functions changes. And now the DNA doesn't function as well, and therefore your body starts to age. So what they had this idea of, and this was an acquisition they made based on all the studies that were done on caloric restriction. You can look up LifeGen Technologies. They're the ones that did all the studies with the NIH that built this foundation of research. Pharmanex then partnered with them with the idea that they could possibly screen for ingredients that are thought to be helpful at slowing down aging and addressing different functions in the body. And with this database now, can you start to feed these ingredients or formulations to mice? And can you take the old gene expression profile and can you make it go back? That was the idea. So they started with the mitochondria. So this is a desired youthful expression. This is an old expression. So ingredient number 1 didn't really have an impact, still looks pretty old. Ingredient number 2, Ingredient number 2 had a little bit of an impact. Ingredient number 3 still looks old, but look at ingredient number 4. You can see that that ingredient almost mimics or resets it completely back to a youthful expression. And so this was a major discovery that they made, really identifying how these nutrients are impacting gene expression related to aging. They then realized they could do this for the rest of the body, and they ended up buying LifeGen Technologies, and they started to take the product, the first product that targets mitochondrial function. The second product they developed targets cellular purification and repair mechanisms, a lot of it related to NRF2 and autophagy. And then the idea, okay, well, we can do it for the rest of the body. So over the last 6 years, they've been working on a formulation that can mimic the effects of caloric restriction systemically for the entire body. That product's been on the market now for about 2 years. It's called Age-Lock Youth. And in addition to boosting carotenoid antioxidant status, which can be measured with the biophotonic scanner in your patients, this is also addressing 6 of the major mechanisms of aging at a genetic level. The first mechanism here is antioxidant defense and protection mechanisms, both outside and inside the cell. The second mechanism is systemic detoxification and cellular stress response. The third is DNA protection repair mechanisms regulating inflammatory balance, tissue regeneration, and metabolism. And what this does is this gets to the core of what causes aging throughout the entire body. And you've got a systemic approach now that can mimic the effects of caloric restriction, which is the only method that's ever been proven to slow down aging. Pharmanex actually has the database or the outcome of what youth preservation looks like epigenetically. Everybody else is guessing about, okay, well, caloric restriction, yes, we would expect to have an outcome. But Pharmanex is the only company now that actually has the epigenetic database where they can actually formulate things based on what the genes look like when youth is preserved. So in addition to that, they started doing some clinical studies. This was actually published in the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology. So many of you that are doing anti-aging are probably doing some things with the skin. People care about their appearance. And so what they did in this study is they took human skin, and this first row here is just the placebo group. So they started to expose the skin to different levels of UV radiation. So one is just the minimal erythemal dose. This is the minimum amount of radiation that causes redness. And then they did double the dose and triple the dose, and they measured the amount of damage, redness, and cell damage as well. With 2 months of supplementation on age-lock youth, the same level of radiation caused almost no damage or redness, and at the higher levels had a significant reduction of, somewhere around 60-70% reduction of inflammation, cellular damage, and DNA damage. And so what we also know is that the skin is a very good model for inflammation for the entire body too. And many of us are concerned about inflammation, and this is a great way of addressing it. The other study, and by the way, also in that skin study, they also showed that in 8 weeks that the supplement improved cosmetic appearance of the skin through a supplement. And so not only is it working inside the body, but also helps improve the visible appearance of the skin. They also then did a study on the cerebral cortex. So we're all concerned about how our brains are going to function as we get older. I know many of us are concerned about how our brain is functioning today. So this is actually a genetic heat map of a cerebral cortex. Each one of these columns is a different gene. So there's about 1,000 or so genes in here. And you can see that this is what an old brain looks like. This is not what you want to look like. This is an old brain. Caloric restriction group, which is a group where aging was preserved significantly. This is what the brain looks like when you severely restrict calories and slow down aging. So this is the desired brain function that you want to have, or genetically. And then what they did is with the age-lock product, they were able to mimic the effects of caloric restriction, and this is pretty significant. I mean, it actually lines up pretty perfectly here. So they're actually showing that some of the gene expression is actually working even better than with the product than it was on caloric restriction. Then they said, okay, it's working in the DNA. What is it actually happening in human brains? So they did a study at the University of Utah with functional brain MRI scans. These are very sophisticated brain scans where they can actually measure brain metabolism, connectivity, structure, or brain activity, essentially. And so on the left-hand side, this is the placebo group. On the right-hand side, this is the treated group. And what you want to look at here is look at the area of brain activity. Look at the area here and so forth. And with the supplementation, you can see much more brain activity happening with the supplemented group within 8 weeks. And I can tell you that I'm remembering things better. Sleep deprivation from my kids doesn't affect me as much. I don't get that brain fog in the afternoon. I mean, you can really feel a difference on this product. It's also done an incredible job really getting rid of the majority of the migraines that I was getting pretty chronically. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's related to the brain function. Maybe it's related to the inflammation. But I know that this has had a huge impact on the migraines that I personally have been getting. So lots of applications to this. Carotenoids and nutrition plays a big role in cardiology, obviously internal medicine, OBGYNs, ophthalmologists are using this. There's a big role in dentistry for periodontal disease and surgical outcomes. So there's lots of applications on where this can fit into many different types of practice, and to really improve the standard of care of how we practice medicine to really address the number one cause of preventable disease. This is my brother-in-law here. So always frustrating going up to New York to visit him because he never really cared about how he ate. His family never really paid attention to things. They just figured if they get sick, they'll get good medical care. And that was frustrating for me. But when I scanned him, he scanned 16,000, and that was a wake-up call for him. And he was so stubborn that he didn't want to go on the supplements. He wanted to do it with his diet. So he actually was one of the few people that radically changed his diet. He got a Vitamix blender, started probably buying $30 of fruits and vegetables, grinding them up. And through that alone, he got his score up to 56,000 without supplementation. So a huge improvement, and he got validation and was excited about that. The problem is that he wasn't able to maintain that. So a few months later, I retested him and he was back down into the 30s, because for most people, doing that amount of juicing or blending every day just isn't practical. So what he does now is a practical approach where he does the best he can do with his diet, and then he supplements with some of the Pharmanex products to make sure he's getting some optimal levels of some of these key ingredients here. So let's talk about the revenue here. There's two revenue streams with this. There's revenue in testing, which is cash you collect in the practice, and there's revenue in the products that the patients are buying. What's nice about this is there's no inventory, no sales tax, no billing. Most of the doctors have the products direct shipped to the patient, and Pharmanex takes care of all of that for you. So let's say that you charge $20 a test, which is what most doctors charge. You can charge more or less, it's up to you, but this is what typical practices charge. Scan 5 patients a day, $25,000 a year, cash revenue in testing. Scan 15 patients a day, $75,000 a year. Most doctors, like I said, build this into their vital signs as a standard protocol in their practice. And for $20, it takes 30 seconds to actually do the test. It's done by the staff. It's easier than blood pressure testing. It's something that's practical to do on your patients every time they come in, or on a somewhat regular basis. So on the supplements then, we know most practices have a few thousand patients. If we just say 5% switch over to the product line, 100 patients is 35 to 40 grand a year. 300 patients on the program is over $100,000 a year, and that's in addition to the testing fees. Again, this is just mailbox money. Your staff doesn't have to deal with the inventory or anything like that. You don't have to tie up resources in stock and so forth. So the investment to get started is $3,400, $3,395 to be exact, plus some taxes and things like that. You get everything you need to get started, including about $2,500 worth of product that you can use as samples for your staff or resell them. We give you all your marketing brochures, all your coaching and training to make sure that this is a success in your practice. You even get a personalized web store. And if you guys are doing anything on Facebook or social media, there's also ways that you can create affiliate links for patients to or people to purchase things directly, really seamlessly. The device is then leased to you for free on a month-to-month basis. That's how the company can get them in your practice without you having to invest $100,000 or more. And they maintain the intellectual property. And the only expense to keep it in the practice is $125 a month, which covers the service contract, the insurance, software, and hardware updates. So anything goes wrong with the device or updates come out, you're 100% covered with all of that. So it's a really nice program. And it's just a month-to-month agreement. So there's no penalty if you decide, in 6 months, it's not a fit for your practice. So we know that if you follow our plan, you will get predictable results. And I'm not sure if Dr. Gonzalez was able to join us here tonight. He was going to try and jump on. I know he was doing some conferences here, but I want to share with you a little bit about kind of his experience. So Dr. Ben Gonzalez, he's been a keynote speaker at A4M and AMMG. For those of you that are going to the Tucson AMMG event later on this year, he'll be one of the keynote speakers there. He's been using the biophotonic scanner in his practice for several years. I think he's had it in there since the second generation came out, so somewhere around 6 or 7 years. And what he said in his practice is functional medicine. He's got a background in genetics, a master's in nutrition. He's got a lot of aesthetics that he does, as well as some liposuction. And he says that this is the most significant thing that he's added to his practice to provoke change in his patients. David Feld has been an OBGYN for 35 years. He said this is what he's been waiting for to address nutrition in his practice. David Rosenberg has got a concierge practice. Said that this has really helped them change behavior towards a healthier lifestyle. And his patients compete against themselves and with him, and it's exciting. And obviously these doctors have also done very well financially since they brought this into their practice. June Kastner, who does integrative medicine, she screens every patient and she sees improved outcomes with the products. Andy Feltz, who's a clinical director to the largest mobile healthcare company. His background is in optometry. So obviously this came from ophthalmology originally, and he believes that every eye doctor should be using this for eye health and overall health. So we've got a huge amount we can do. Andrea Sullivan, certified sports chiropractor. She said that this has been great for her practice. She said she's been able to market more supplements to her patients in the first 2 months of this program than she was the previous 2 years. We'll conclude the webinar for tonight. Again, a survey will pop up. Please fill it out for us, and it'll take you about 1 minute to do. Thanks again for joining us tonight. You guys have a great evening, and we'll look forward to working with you. Bye-bye.